So welcome everybody. It's good to see everyone. Happy May. The finish line is in sight, I promise. So again, welcome. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We're going to talk a little bit about fall, and there's been lots of conversation about, well, what are you doing in connection with this, or what are you doing in connection with that? And so we wanted to have an opportunity to pull heads together who wanted to share and just kind of give you some things to consider as we begin our preparation and planning for the fall. Now, two comments I want to make before I turn it over to Mary Catherine. First, we want to be clear that this is just an opportunity for us to share. The association is not prescribing that you do certain things, and I suspect we're going to find different approaches on some of these questions, and that's okay. So just realize that as an opportunity to share, make sure we're going into this with that understanding of what the session is. You're not going to hear us, for example, say we as SAES require you to do A, B, or C. There are just too many local specifics and local issues at play that you're the expert on, not us. So just wanted to start with that caveat. The second caveat is, since it's May, and while it doesn't feel like it's a long way away, a lot is going to happen between now and day one of school. So there are guidelines that are still being released. I anticipate we'll see changes to CDC guidelines. I anticipate we're going to see changes from OSHA, which could have an effect on certain aspects of your program if you have non-program related employees like custodial staff, food staff. OSHA regulations could have an effect on that. All of that is still pending. So we did I attended a webinar yesterday with Kristen Smith from Fisher Phillips, and a lot of their counsel is still wait and see. We need to watch how that's going to unfold. So that puts you in an interesting position, because that's going to be what we're going to have to communicate to parents. Parents, for example, are going to want to know exactly what next year looks like. We're going to have to tell them, we're putting our plans together, but we will let you know as we get closer to day one, which is going to be anxiety provoking for heads of school, I know. But I want to call that out and realize that some of the things that you tell your parents may, in some ways, be less than satisfying, because we're still waiting to hear what certain regulations and certain advice is coming down the line to us. So just wanted to start with those two caveats. I'm going to turn it over now to Mary Catherine, our Director of Professional Development, and she will talk about the folks we have invited to be our panelists today, and then we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So thank you all so much for being with us. Mary Catherine, do you want to tell her she's unmuted, or shall I? What do you think?
Sorry, y'all, I know you wanted me muted. I know that you're all thinking that's a perfect thing for her. No, I'm really glad to see all of your faces. It really is nice to see you. And as David said, we are so close. You are so close. And so I hope that this will be a great opportunity for y'all just to kind of discuss things. And so first of all, I want to say thank you to you for coming on. And second of all, I want to say thank you to the people that are panelists, because I think that they're going to be able to offer some guidance, but also they're going to have their own questions because they're doing what you're doing. So first of all, I want to introduce Rob Devlin. Rob, go ahead and wave your... Rob Devlin is the head of school at St. George in San Antonio. He's also the president of the SAES board. And then we've got Nancy Simpson, who is at St. Andrews, Houston. Nancy is not only the head of school there, but she is our esteemed chair of the standards committee. And then we've got Catherine Bohot. Catherine, wave your hand here. Catherine's at Calvary Bastrop, and one of the things that we've talked a lot about is just the detail around all of the places where you get information. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of start with some of the things that these three leaders talked about when they were considering what are the topics that they're thinking about. And obviously masks is at the top of the list. That's been something that everybody wants to talk about. Will we be temperature screening? What is the exposure response going to be? The protocol around that, will it be the same? Will it be different? Campus access, will we continue to restrict? the way we're restricting now? Cleaning, will we keep doing that? Vaccinations, remote versus in-person instruction, rapid testing on campus, will that continue? So what I'd like to do is kind of just maybe start around the conversation around masks, because I think that's going to be a big one. And I want to let Rob, I want to let each one of our panelists kind of talk about that topic. And then if we want to throw something out, we can. I want to make sure that we try to hit as many of these topics as possible. So let's just start, Rob, with you and kind of what your thought is around masking for the fall.
Hey, thanks, Mary Katherine. And hey, thanks everyone for joining us. When I replied to a message board comment saying, hey, what are you guys thinking for next year? And I replied back saying, hey, I wouldn't mind jumping on a call to hear everyone's thoughts on that. I didn't realize that volunteered me, but I'm happy to share my thoughts, but also I look forward to hearing thoughts from everybody on this call. So with regard to masks, that's one of the key questions I keep getting. I had an email 2 weeks ago from a father of an elementary student. And by the way, we are a pre-K through 8 school in San Antonio, Texas, about 500 kids. So that kind of gives you some context of where I'm coming from. But the father of a preschool, elementary school kid, first grader, wrote me and said, the typical, hey, thanks, Rob, for all you and your team are doing such a great job, kind of buttering me up a little bit. And his next sentence, for the love of God, when will our children get to breathe the sweet air of liberty once again? And that, I think all of us in some ways are having those conversations. I have families that are scared to death and they are desperate to keep masks, and I have people on the other end of the spectrum that are ready to burn them in a giant bonfire tonight if we could. So the mask is a tough one. I think for the younger kids, I'm going to tell my families next week on our community update call that's kind of one of those to be determined. But we understand the need for conveying social and emotional cues without a mask and how important that is, particularly with the younger kids. But we also have learned this year that the masks are a very easy protection that we can incorporate. And if we're going to start talking about peeling away some of the other layers of protection, the masking situation might be one of the last ones that we pull away from, particularly with our older kids, if we go away from cohorting and other things. And that's the direction that we're headed, again, with giant asterisks and caveats on, as variants or situations change. If we learn nothing else this year, we know that we should expect the unexpected and be ready to adjust if needed. But that's our plan for moving forward. Is that kind of what you're looking for, Mary Katherine?
Sorry, Nancy, are you you want to touch base on what kind of, I don't know what you guys have been doing in your preschool. It may not be an issue with you with your little ones.
Thank you, Mary Katherine, and thanks, Rob. I'm going to tag on to what Rob has said. I don't know that any of us have any clear-cut answers. We do mask for children ages 3 and up. The 1 and 2 year olds are not masked, and we are planning on continuing that in the fall, at least starting out that way, because it's an easy thing to do. The kids don't mind wearing the masks. We do have, Rob, as you mentioned, that one parent. I also had a parent this week who's said the same thing, just challenging it. And I'm sure we will continue to have a small percentage of families that do so, but we're right now, until we have different intel, we plan on doing the same thing in the fall with wearing masks.
Catherine,
maybe not outside. We're considering not outside wearing masks.
Catherine, you want to piggyback on that?
So yeah, we're all in the same boat. We don't know enough at this point to make any definitive calls. There are some ISDs that have already come out and said they don't plan on masking next year. One of them is Eanes ISD in Central Austin, their Spring Branch in Houston. And so that to me is a perfect example of being pretty premature, because if things turn really quickly this summer, they're going to look pretty foolish come August when they have to send an email out being like, never mind. But so, I'm in Bastrop. I'm in a rural community. We're small, and the general feel in the community right now is that they they are hoping for masks to not be a requirement next year. Like Rob and like Nancy, I have a parent who's giving me a little bit of trouble, in a little bit more extreme. I've been called a Chinese communist sympathizer because they own the CDC now, if you didn't know that. And also saying that we're in violation of Chapter 37. So these people have gotten a little bit extreme with it. So, you know, obviously we're not going to make any decisions based on people threatening to where, you know, if they were really worried about their children's health and safety, they just wouldn't send them to school here because it's an option. But our plan will be based on where we are with a county positivity rate. Bastrop is a little bit of a challenge, and we had to create our own matrix, because we don't have hospitalization data for us. We have to go to Travis County for that. We'll also be looking at what the local ISD is doing because they haven't made a call yet. And really just seeing what's coming out from the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics, because on March 26th, the CDC put some information out of a study on some schools in Florida, which basically said that the transmission rate among students is so low that, you know, kids just aren't great vectors for this. And so, you know, as loud and aggressive as some of the parents have been about it, they've been bringing, while some of them are a little crazy with, you know, communism, the other ones have been bringing some pretty good studies and information forward for us to take a look at. The other consideration based on where you are is to, you know, be sure you're aware of where your diocese stands with it, because I know the Diocese of Texas and the Diocese of West Texas are in similar places, but not exactly the same, and then where your parish stands on it as well, because we're, you know, trying to decipher that as a bit of an enigma as well. So I'm hoping to write a plan based on the way things are trending, maybe not necessarily share it yet, but have the bones there, and then with contingency plans that fringe off of that in the event that there's changes.
Yeah,
Mary
I think
Catherine, we've got a couple of questions. Can I throw those out?
sure.
So a couple of questions. One, can you unmute and talk to us if you have already changed your masking policies? If you have, let us know. And if no one talks, then Chris, I think the answer to that is no. Okay, next question is for Nancy. Nancy, have your threes been wearing masks all day or just in transition?
All day.
Okay, all day. Thank you. Comment from Melissa, we're following the positivity rates. I believe using a standard will help. Yes, I agree. One other comment about masks, just FYI, this is completely in the wait and see category. But according to Kristen Smith, we're expecting OSHA guidelines to come out that will recommend continued masking. So obviously that doesn't really apply to all of your faculty necessarily. But as I mentioned, if you have parts of your component that are regulated by OSHA, that could be a consideration as well. Obviously not for students, but that's in the mix as well. So keep an eye out for those regulations. They have been promising those regulations to us now for about 2 months. So I don't exactly know when we'll see that, but that's another thing that's in the mix. Depending on what policy you have for faculty and students, you may have to have a policy for employees as well that complies with OSHA. Back to you, Mary Catherine.
Yeah, the Diocese of West Texas is recommending, stay with masks for now. I don't know if that'll change. Bishop Reed will change that. And I don't know what the Diocese of Texas will do, but I think both dioceses will be taking a look. Both of those Texas dioceses will be taking a look at that later in the summer to see how things, if they decide to change that. A couple of other things about masks. Any differences in mask guidelines for teachers who are fully vaccinated? That's going to be David. I don't know what the vaccination play is with
that's
this.
That's gonna be tricky. Obviously, the CDC guidelines do talk about differences between vaccinations and between masking guidelines if you're vaccinated or not vaccinated. So I get a little bit nervous about trying to collect that information for employees. At this point, I don't know if we're seeing a lot of examples of masking for employees. If you're vaccinated, masking for, if you're not vaccinated, we really want you to wear a mask, whatever that would look like. The only thing that we're saying with regard to guidance for immunizations for faculty, for example, is recommended but not required. So that tends to be the general expectation that we're seeing being placed on faculty members for immunizations. I'm not seeing a lot of different masking policies for faculty who are vaccinated versus faculty who are not vaccinated.
Yeah, I think regarding the vaccinations, let's just touch on that for just a minute. So that's what we're hearing. We've heard that from Kristen. We've heard that from David. Just this idea around we're strongly recommending vaccinations, but not requiring them. Is that, throw it in the chat if there's something different than that. I'd be interested. I think people would be interested in knowing if you're doing something different. But generally, David, I think that's what we're seeing is the recommending, not requiring.
And another comment we have from a participant, the state called me yesterday asking for how many of our staff are vaccinated. So they're assuming we have that info. I have not had, that's the first I've heard of that. Has anyone else been contacted by the state? And Beth, if you would let me know, when you say the state, are you talking your licensing? Are you talking Department of Health? Who contacted you?
It freaked me out because they have to leave a message and I didn't know what was going on, but it was not my rep, but it was someone from, I thought it was Department of Health and Human Services in their child care area, but they wanted to, not specific names, but they wanted to know how many were on my staff and how many have been fully vaccinated and how many are deciding not to be.
Okay. So, Catherine, did you ever see a hand up from Catherine?
So TEA, back when I think it was Abbott said that teachers were going to the front line to be people who were vaccinated. I did get a call from, I think it was TEA, just finding out if we needed more vaccines. So did anybody else get that call where they were just trying to, for availability? So I'm not sure if it was related to that. I have not gotten a call asking how many are or not. It was just, do you need any more? That was the only call I've gotten.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think unless there's something else on the vaccines, that's I'd like to go to the next topic, which is remote versus in-person. I know this has been a big topic. I'm going to start with Rob again and go to Catherine, probably because Nancy's not going to have much to say about remote learning in a preschool. But Rob, what is your thought around remote versus in-person learning for next year?
So yeah, that's a super hot topic for our school, but just a quick note on the vaccination piece. NAIS put out a good infographic on schools that are requiring vaccinations versus highly recommending, and that's kind of that might be a fun infographic to share around. And then I'm curious. Also, I'm hearing tons of rumors that next week 12 and up will be eligible for vaccinations, and so I'm curious if anyone has any comments on that at some point during our call today, and you know, kind of where you're headed there. So with respect to remote versus in-person learning, so this year, you know, here at St. George, and probably like many of you guys, you know, we opted to offer both simultaneously, and although that was something I think that was a wise decision at the time, we learned very quickly that that's a very difficult proposition to maintain, and has contributed significantly to my teachers' you know, physical exhaustion, I guess you could say, and mental exhaustion. And so our plan for next year moving forward is to not offer remote instruction as a general option, but to just to say to our families, hey, we're going to be 100% in person next year. We are an in-person school. That's what we do best. We know your kids do best in that environment. But we realize that there may be a family here or there who have a legitimate you know, medically documented reason. I have a young man who has brain cancer, for example, and you know, in the absence of COVID altogether, we would offer that young man remote instruction, and so of course we will continue to do that for those kinds of situations. The other caveat that we're struggling with, and we don't have full agreement among my leadership team, but we're working through that, is, you know, what happens in a situation. There's an exposure event, for example, and depending on where we go with our exposure protocols, you know, we end up asking a student or several students who are deemed to be close contacts with a confirmed positive case. Would we at that point ask those students to stay home without the option of joining remotely. And personally, I'm struggling with that. I don't think that's a great option. I don't like the feel of asking a student to stay home, but the student was potentially exposed, and then also saying to that student, and you can't join remotely and participate in the learning that's happening while you're staying home to keep our community safe. So I suspect that we'll come to some sort of compromise there, but that's where my head is right now with respect to your question, Mary Katherine, remote versus in-person. All in person with extremely limited options for remote learning in special circumstances.
Catherine, do you have anything different that you're offering? I mean, are you thinking differently?
No, we're exactly the same. So we have 2% of our population right now who's elected to stay virtual, and we'll do away with that for next year. And yeah, I'm with Rob as far as exposure response. So, in the event that we have an entire class, I think that would warrant a period of distance learning. So I think the exposure response and whether or not we offer virtual is going to be contingent upon any changes that come out from the CDC this course of the summer. If this transitions to being treated like a, or if protocols stay similar to what they are. But we would only offer virtual if we have a situation where a student is at home self-isolating.
Right. So is anybody else, what I'd love you to do is throw it in the chat if you are planning to do, if you're still planning to do virtual, or if there's something different from what these two guys have talked about, or if you have questions about this. This brings the question up around cohorting and pods and exposure. And so I want to be sure that if there's any additional questions about this, if somebody's going to do something different, we'd love to hear that. Otherwise, I'd like to talk then about exposure response and how that's going to work. Anybody want to just unmute yourself if you feel like you have something to say here? Okay, so let's talk then about exposure response and, what will that change? And let's throw pods in there as well, because I know many of you did pods, and that was one of the questions that was sent in is, are we still going to be doing pods? And, if so, how does that work? It's easy to, I think when you have pods, you just do that. That's the whole pod that does the quarantine, but now it's going to be different if you're not doing pods. So let me start with Nancy. Nancy, do you guys do cohorting or pods of any kind like that?
Thanks, Mary Katherine. Yes, we are cohorting. And who knows about the fall?
Right.
I think we're tending towards not cohorting for the fall, assuming things continue in a more positive direction. Should that change, we'll go back to cohorting. But right now we're planning on not cohorting in the fall, but continuing with masks and continuing with the same rules about exposure and symptom-free for 72 hours and a negative COVID test and all of those things. But giving into the cohorting seems to be it seems that our community is ready for that.
Okay. Catherine, do you have anything different that y'all will be doing?
We're a little bit different. And so we're pre-K through 6th grades. This year at a massive deficit, we decided not to offer after school care just because that would violate our cohorting that we had done to this point. So we plan to bring that back next year. This, like everything else, is contingent upon what's going out in the greater community. When I talked to some of the medical people, they brought up, in addition to positivity rate in the community, the trending towards herd immunity with vaccine rates within the community as well. So, hopefully those two data points go in the appropriate directions and we can start to bring it back. One thing that we've noticed as well is, Calvary had one positive case all year long. And so, given the success we've had, we're hoping that we can continue that success with bringing the cohorts back. In addition to, and we'll probably touch on this in a minute, is gathering, because for us, we have not had chapel all together all year long. We're still doing Zoom chapel because of the cohorts. So we're hoping to bring that back as well.
Okay, Rob, do you have thoughts on exposure response? How you guys have y'all been talking about that might look different, or anything about the cohorting? I think you mentioned cohorting already.
Yeah, so yeah, we do. Cohorting has been a kind of cornerstone of our strategy this year, and we are ready to let that go and to get back to a full-blown program with our enrichment during the day, mixing classes, but also after-school programs as well. And so obviously that doesn't play well with a cohorting strategy. So I think we're extremely likely to abandon the cohorting strategy for mitigating risk. With respect to the exposure protocols and how we manage that, I've been reading some interesting things from some other states that are saying, when there's some states are going with, if there's a positive case, then we're just going to watch, the close contacts, but we're not going to require them to quarantine. And some of the data that I've been seeing with that strategy indicates, a very consistent approach, same kind of results as if you did quarantine the kids, right? So I think that's something to watch. I think that we're more likely to lighten how we offer our quarantine strategy. We've kind of gone with the gold standard all year, even when CDC has offered more lenient options with respect to the quarantines. We've stuck with kind of the gold standard 14 days, but I think we're much more likely to say things like, hey, I know for sure we'll say, since we're not doing the cohorting model, we're not going to quarantine the whole cohort. And so we're going to have to do our contact tracing a little bit differently. And then I think we're more likely to shorten that amount of quarantine time and also utilize testing as part of that strategy to reduce the amount of time in the cohort, in the quarantine event as well. So I think we're more likely to, I guess, lighten up a little bit, but not abandon some of our exposure related responses.
Okay. Good stuff. Okay. So again, Chris Carter says that he does not anticipate cohorting. We're already starting to allow some multi-grade gathering if all are masked and socially distanced. It is going to be, to me, super interesting around this. If they start vaccines for 12 and over, what's going to happen a month from now if they do even younger. So, and how that will affect the fall. I think that's really, I know the frustrating part for you guys is that you'd love to be able to make a statement, and you just if you do, it's gonna as y'all all experienced what that was like last year, making a statement and then having to change it. Let's talk a little bit about campus access, because I think that kind of speaks to the gathering. Katherine and I talked earlier about again with the diocese, the different dioceses have different rules. And in the Diocese of West Texas, Bishop Reed has kind of allowed the communities to decide, even the church communities are deciding how they do. And so some communities have still not had in-person church, and our community, St. Albans, has been doing in-person church with socially distanced and masked since last May. So the question is around a gathering. A lot of that is going to be determined. Some of that is going to be determined by your diocese, but let's start with you, Katherine, and talk a little bit about how do you see kind of campus access? How do you see gathering? What are you thinking at this point?
So our parish went back to in-person church inside the building. They did a lot of outdoor services for a while. They went back to in-person services probably 2 months ago. We have not taken chapel back inside yet. Part of it is just kind of as things relaxed there to now to the point where they're sitting every other pew staggered for church services. It's not enough physical space for us to get our two separate groups of chapel in there. And so it's just been easier for us to if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of situation. So, for the here and now, we're going to just continue the rest of the year with Zoom chapel. I am going to be back in the sanctuary for the first time when we do our award ceremonies, which we're doing by cohort. So instead of doing one that I knock out in 40 minutes, I have 5 different award ceremonies the last week of school. And so We will obviously observe the church's guidelines set forth. So those are the distancing and the masking while the students and the parents are in there for the ceremonies. So we're hopeful that next year that we can get back in there. I mean, even if it's the 3-foot rule and masked, but we're hopeful that it is trending away from that. I can tell you as a leader who does chapel 3 times a week, I cannot physically make myself do Zoom chapel every day from, the entire year next year. It's just, it's talking to a blank screen is just not, is anybody else having to do Zoom chapel, or is it just still me? Yeah, it's just not fun, right? It's miserable. So, for my own sanity, if I do 1 class a week in there and rotate through and Zoom from there, I need children and I need to hear them singing. I can't, YouTube videos of songs aren't working for me anymore. So, we are planning to go back in there. It's just a matter of how can we make it fit within the church's protocols and keep it developmentally appropriate at the same time.
Yeah. Nancy and Rob, just to the question around, are you guys going to begin to let people back on campus? People as in parents, as in guests?
Go ahead, Rob.
So for us, that's a little bit to be determined, but I think yes. I mean, that's a huge part of our community is, the welcoming aspect of having everybody on campus. But I think one of the blessings of COVID, right, if you can even go that direction, is that we've kind of trained our parents now on different routes for campus access, and it's had a very positive effect with respect to security. And so we just had a follow-up meeting with our facilities group talking about very little pushback. People are used to it. And so we'll be able to funnel and check and screen folks and kind of manage the access, I think, a little bit better. As far as big events, that's kind of the to be determined piece, right? Campus access via big events, athletics or, big fine arts productions and things like that. We're committed to seeking ways to do that because it's a hugely important part of our community. But I don't have any firm understanding of actually how we're going to accomplish that at this point.
Yeah, one of the things that this is a gentle push towards October and biennial conference, but one of the things that we're going to be talking a lot about is the idea around recovery from all of this, and how are we recovering as leaders? How are we helping our teachers recover, and how are we finding ways to reconnect a community that has been away from each other? So that's a gentle nudge towards biennial, but I think it's going to be important because that's going to be what you are doing for the next year, is reconnecting your community. And so I encourage you to learn more about that. Nancy, I would love for you to kind of touch on a little bit around campus access and little ones. And also, if you are a standalone preschool and you have specific questions around little ones, I'd love for you to throw that in the chat. And Nancy, if we have time, we'll put you in a breakout room. If we don't, then Nancy can just announce it, answer them. But Nancy, what are your thoughts around campus access?
It's very similar to what Rob was saying. We have trained our parents to not come in the building or to do so in a very, very different way. And we're happy with that. The parents are not unhappy with that. So I think we'll be very slow to change as we move into the fall, and very, very careful. It's not, it's a slow hanging fruit, something we can do to ensure an extra layer of safety, and nobody's offended by that at this point. As far as big activities, we have done one outdoor family concert. We usually do those 2 or 3 times a year inside. We did so outside in the parking lot, and we asked families to stay in their own family pod 6 feet away from other families, and it was lovely. And so I think we'll do some other activities like that outdoors, or at least that's what we're planning for the fall, until numbers get a lot better. So it wouldn't be the normal inside all school chapel or family chapel, nothing like that yet, but something outside where there's a little more.
Would love to just kind of take a minute and see if anybody has questions around any of that. Questions around access or anything we've talked about so far.
Just a comment on access. For the first time this year, I had to tackle some parents that we've had here, a 4th grade parent whose daughter's been here since pre-K3, questioning how and why we do certain things, just because the lack of access to the campus bred some mistrust. And so I'm looking forward to people being able to be back here and feel like they're physically part of the community again, because this is a parent I have never had any issues with. She's always been extremely positive, extremely happy. So I'm hopeful that can happen in a reasonable way next year. And then to Nancy's point, we are doing our kindergarten graduation out in the church courtyard, and it's a BYOC, bring your own chair event to sit with your pods of people. Just because we don't have a physical enough space to socially distance in the sanctuary with all those people. So
yeah. So we have a couple of comments in the chat. Make sure you guys see it. Barbara Simmons, we've recently allowed parents only to come on campus for a program following social distancing and masking. Beth Sari, standalone preschool. We started allowing one class of parents per week to attend chapel with their students, class, distance, and mask, and they were so thankful. We'll also be doing outside graduation. Chris Carter, I'm allowing 8th grade parents only to come to chapel next week with 8th grade students only present and all other grades on live stream. The parents are so excited. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. It's starting to feel like it, that people can do this again. So it sounds like you guys are really working hard to try to get that accomplished. This is a tactical conversation around, so we talked a little bit about testing, the rapid testing. So my question is twofold. And we'll start with Rob and then go to Katherine and Nancy. Will you be continuing to do temperature screening? And will you be Rob tested on the rapid testing, but will you continue to use rapid testing?
So is that for me first?
That's for you, Rob.
So we're using a testing strategy right now. Our 8th graders, we're sending them on a trip after they graduate, so they can't come back and potentially expose other people. But we're requiring a series of tests for them leading into that, and then we'll continue that testing strategy, I think, on as a strategy to help us prevent exposures on suspected cases and things like that, or asymptomatic potential exposures. So I think we'll continue with the testing all throughout next year as a strategy to help reduce quarantines and things like that. What was the second part of your question?
Are you going to do temperature testing?
Oh, the screening pieces.
The screening.
So this year, we do a pretty elaborate screening as the parents start arriving. We have different people stationed down the street to do some temperature checks. And there's an app that we developed where they've got to answer a series of questions and then demonstrate that and show us a badge on their phone that says, yep, I've answered all the questions and I have certified that we're not experiencing any symptoms. I don't think we're going to go that direction next year. I can't say for sure. We're leaning right now towards kind of just a more general arrival. So I don't think we'll screen, for visitors and things like that. I don't think we're going to be so elaborate with our daily screening with every student on every single day. We have staff out there that are sanitizing hands before they come on campus, that are taking temperatures and checking the app. And I think we're going to resume more normal arrival and departure procedures next year.
Okay. Katherine?
We are the same. So right now we only temp screen. We are a tiny little school with 100 kids right now. I don't have a nurse on staff, so I don't keep medical records either. So our screening could not be anything where we stored student data. So it's literally just, I don't have my thermometer, but boop, boop, boop as they get out of the car, make sure they're below 98.6 and they could get in. Part of me is conflicted about doing away with that because, as you guys probably have felt, you have not had strep or flu this year, knock on wood, or no hand, foot, and mouth, or no other weirdness. So that's been awesome. But I'd like to not have to take everybody's temperature every single day. As far as the on-campus testing, because we don't have a nurse, I am not comfortable being the person putting Q-tips in noses just from a liability standpoint, and I'm not medically trained either. So we have not done that, nor will we proceed with it.
Nancy, do you have any extra thoughts on that?
Nothing extra. I'm going to add to it and say that the screening that we do now, right now, we're meeting children at our screening for temperature and going through a series of questions that we have shortened. And I don't know that we will discontinue that. It's worked well. And at least with children our age, because sickness is a part of what we do anyway, it's certainly raised awareness in each family to say, oh, maybe, instead of the denial of my child is not, there's nothing wrong with my child. I don't see any runny nose. It's helped them be a little more aware and own their part in the responsibility of taking a little bit more, we shouldn't say better care of their child, but paying a little more attention to some of the symptoms. So right now, I think we will continue some form of it, to be determined for sure, but that's what we're leaning towards.
Good. Do you all do rapid testing? Y'all don't do rapid testing for little ones.
We ask if a test is required, we ask that they go to their pediatrician for that.
Okay.
That's worked out. Nobody has pushed back.
This is a really good question from Sheila around the travel requirements. This isn't something that we talked about in our little group, but I know it's something you guys have been doing, or some of you have been doing, which is to, when you know a family is traveling somewhere. So is there anyone you want to throw out what they're going to be doing, if that's going to change, if that's something they've been dealing with, this idea of travel requirements, staying home for 7 days after you've been on an airplane or gone to, I don't know, Mexico or Cabo or
the when you know lead in is critical in that. We've had families disclose that they were traveling and opt to test when they return. We've had families who I find out on Facebook that they're skiing in Utah. So we didn't write into policy. We had everybody sign our return to school or reopening guide that stated that they would notify us if they came in contact with anybody, but we didn't specify with travel, and we just were very, very lucky. I will say that we did delay our return to school in January for fear of that, just with the New Year's Eve celebrations and stuff. Mm-hmm. Instead of returning the 6th, we waited the following, which ended up helping us with one staff member who ended up testing positive. But no, we are not planning on doing anything with requiring testing or requiring a 7-day stay at home post travel, because if your families are anything like mine, if they have a 7-day vacation, they're just going to go on another vacation while they're waiting to be able to go back to school.
No, that never happens, Katherine. No one's family does that.
May I say something, Mary Katherine?
Of course.
Since I put that question out there, it's been I've had to really manage this in this community. The only positive true exposure that I've had in the school was in my TWOS program, and it was with a family who had traveled, and I had to close a FORS classroom, 2 FORS classrooms and 2 TWOS classrooms because they had traveled. What was interesting about it is that the backlash from their peers was worse than anything I could have done. So that was just a natural consequence, but I definitely have to look into it because these people in my community, they travel all the time. So I do have a specific guideline in place. They do have to stay home for 7 days, and I keep reiterating it, and most of our families follow it. Been really good about following it. But to Katherine's point, it is very difficult to manage, and I'm sure that I've got people traveling that I don't hear from. I'm sure it happens. So.
I'm sure it does too. Okay, so this is the last question. Then I'd like to have a little bit of time for you guys for just throw whatever out you want to make comments or whatever. But the last conversation we had was around the idea of cleaning. I know that many of you have spent tons of money on new ways to clean. And I'm wondering kind of how that's going to look not that you're going to all go back to, I don't even think anybody will ever go back to the same way they cleaned before this, but let's start with you, Nancy. Are y'all going to do anything? Are y'all going to keep those same really high standards? Will you change a little bit? I know the CDC has changed kind of direction around this.
That's I don't know is the answer. Right now, we're not planning on changing anything because we're a Montessori school. The work in the classroom, which is defined by a tray or a basket, normally gets used and then restored on the shelf, and another child may use it. Right now, it's going to a cleaning station and being disinfected before it's restored to the shelf. So we might stop that piece of it, but we'll still do the extra cleaning that we've done at the end of the day and throughout the day. That's the only thing that might shift. Just it's very labor intensive.
Rob?
So I think any kind of conversation that you have that says, yeah, we're not going to do so much cleaning anymore is not going to go over well. But I think, realistically, I doubt that we'll be as vigilant, right? I mean, we got super intense with all of our cleaning and hired all kind of crew. And I think we'll keep most of those staff in place. But instead of, having the mister running every single night, we might miss once a week. And, instead of wiping down continuously throughout the day, every door handle and doorknob, that just might be morning and evening, those kinds of things, right? So the intensity of that may just quietly and unannounced taper off a little bit. Does that make sense? The air filters and the UV filters that we installed, all of that, of course, we'll continue to maintain and use and utilize to clean and scrub the air. So that piece of it we'll maintain, I think will be helpful.
Great. Katherine, anything to add to that?
We'll do the same thing with the filters and the AC components we bought. Right now, we're fogging high touch areas 4 times a day with the electrostatic cleaning guns. That will reduce down to probably twice a day. I could go just to it at the end of the day, but kids are dirty, so I think it's good to do in the middle of the day, especially at the littles. But I kind of like it. I mean, it's been nice, and it's honestly, if any of you have the Victory guns to use it, they're really easy to clean and they don't leave much residue. So they're a very handy tool in general.
Great. Okay, so we have a couple of comments. Colin says we're keeping our UV filters in the HVAC system, but going to reduce some of the electrostatic spraying. Ken Willie, we are aiming to keep our standards high. We may not have done as much as some schools, but levels of strep and flu are down. Perhaps we could keep them low next year too. Yeah, I think that's a great side effect of this, is just not having near as much of that business. So I guess what I'd like to do now is just have you, if you want to, you know how to raise your hand or raise your hand like this. If you have something to say or comment or something you want to add to this, I'd love to hear it. So Scooty, do you want to ask this question again? What did you've got a question up here.
Yeah, I joined a little late, but it sounded as though most of you were not ready to lift your mask mandate. What would it take for you to shift to mask optional? Is there a particular metric, or what? You calling on your medical community? Are you looking at community transmission numbers in your school? I'm just groveling with that.
Chris, go ahead.
Sorry. The local pediatricians I've been consulting with, I've been kind of surprised, or both sort of said, well, I hope we can get rid of masks next year, and are not feeling like it's going to be really essential. I think, especially if we can get middle school kids immunized, and when your pediatricians are saying we're not that worried about the kids younger in terms of how bad the illness is for them and the effects. I mean, but I'm waiting to see what we're going to hear. My concern is the state of Louisiana, I think, was more generally restrictive than the state of Texas was. And we had some fairly intense guidelines given by the state that have not been removed yet. So for me, it's really going to come down to what the local or what the state DOE says, before we really decide.
Does that help, Scooty? Melissa, and then Troy. Go ahead, Melissa.
We are looking at the positivity rates. And the other thing that's been really positive, and a positive outcome of COVID is the head of schools in the Waco area have started collaborating, and we meet every week. And so part of the issue that you hear from parents is, well, if you're going to continue to wear masks, then we're not coming to your school, we're going to that school. Well, it's been nice to collaborate with those other heads of schools where we have the same policy. And so that's one thing that's been helping us. And as I look at the positivity rates, when things were kind of getting out of control, it's when it was at like 15, 14. Well, we're down to anywhere from 3 to 5. And we're looking at if we stay below 10, then mask optional. I'm going to let any child who wants to wear a mask, obviously. I think the bigger issue will be whether I will require my staff to wear a mask. But we're hoping that the children can be mask optional in the fall, and looking at that benchmark of probably 10, as a positivity rate. And so that way it helps parents see, okay, we've got something to look at, and we're going to hope that does not happen. But as we know, I mean, my area, the vaccination rates are not as high as they might be in some metropolitan areas. So that's always something to look at too. But so that's what we're doing, is we're trying to decide what the benchmark's going to be with the 7-day positivity rate. I also reached out to David Dearman in the Texas, if you're in the Diocese of Texas, and David basically said, at this point, they are still letting each community kind of make those decisions. Because every city's different too. So we are going to set a standard. I don't know that standard yet, but it'll probably be somewhere around 8 to 10. And if our positivity rate is below that, then masks can be optional, especially for children. We're still a little on the fence with adults.
Okay, Troy, did you have something you wanted to say? And then I've got a question from Ken Willie. Go ahead, Troy.
I think for us, it's been important to send the message to our community that we're consistent in how we're reviewing these things. And from day one, we have been clear that we're going to get our guidance from CDC and local health officials. And until those guidelines change and say that the masks aren't required, we're not going to change that guidance. I think it's whether or not, I think trying to track positivity rates, we have people coming from all over the place, and I think it's just harder to just be consistent, I think, if we go that route. And so for me in running the school, I needed a simple way to keep track of things where I wasn't sitting here all day tracking, Houston Medical Center charts that most people don't understand how to read anyway. So to me, it's until the CDC says that children don't need to wear masks and adults don't need to be shouldn't be wearing them indoors, we're going to continue to wear them. I do think the distancing is going to go away. I mean, it'll be normal distancing. I think cohorting will be fine. But in terms of masking, I think until we get that guidance, I don't think we're going to change what we're doing. And the fact is, what I'm trying to avoid is, one person in our community catches COVID and gets really sick or passes away from it. And if they trace it back to the school and they say, well, why did you, all of a sudden you were using these guidelines and all of a sudden you changed your mind, you went this other way, why did you do that? I need to have, you need to have a really, really solid reason to back that up. So I think we're just going to stick with the same criteria we've been using from the beginning, which has served us very well. We've had very few problems.
Thanks for that. I appreciate it. So Ken Willie asked, this is an interesting question. It's something we've been talking about a lot about, and David may need to jump in on this one. I have a question about sick leave for teachers who choose not to vaccinate. So far, teachers who have to isolate or quarantine have not used their sick personal days, but what are people's thoughts on teachers who choose not to vaccinate? David, do you want to just touch on that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of I'm not aware of sick leave policies being created for the pool of employees that are vaccinated versus pool of employees that are not vaccinated. I'm not aware of that approach.
Okay.
I think it could be challenging.
Yeah.
To try to pull that off.
Could you what I'm hearing from some places is our old sick policies go into effect, right?
Go back to normal.
Yeah. And
I think that's fine. I think it's challenging to have a sick policy that applies in different ways to a pool of employees based on immunization.
correct.
Yeah. And again, I think as we always talk about, when you're making decisions around these kinds of things, you really do need to have a lawyer and an attorney that you're consulting in your community. It's going to be critical. Distancing. We're about 5 minutes towards the hour, and I want to be sure we honor your time. But here's a question about, are we changing social distancing in the classrooms for next year? Colin says we're not worried about distancing within the classroom, mainly because the medical advice is that they can in a classroom together for longer than 10 to 15 minutes are already sharing enough common space to make distance moot. So are we going to change distancing at all? I think it's gone to 3 feet. That's right, correct? It's now 3 feet. Are y'all planning to change that, or are you just going to wait on CDC? Anybody?
Speaking candidly, it's impossible to maintain the distance at all times anyway, especially with our younger students. So we can try to manage it to the best of our ability, but children are children. So, you know, the one positive case we did have, we shut down the whole cohort instead of just the students who sat around that child, because it didn't seem appropriate to be able to say that I knew that kid was only around those 4 other students all day, even if without chaining them to their chairs.
Mm-hmm.
So we won't. Now, are we going to overcrowd our classrooms? No, but we won't limit them at the rate that we did this year.
Other comments around that? David, did you have something you wanted to finish up with?
I was going to throw a question out. I'm interested to know if anyone made changes to their enrollment contract based on COVID exposure. Okay, thanks.
I will say though that with masking, I forgot to tell y'all this. I have had a couple families ask me that will they get their deposit back and be let out of their contract if we come out in August and say we will mask students. And the decisions that my board and I have made with those families is yes, just because it is a big enough deal to them where they don't want their children in the building if they have to wear masks. And so we're trying to be compassionate and understanding to that. So right now it's only 3 kids. We're hoping that it doesn't gain a lot of traction, but is anybody else getting those questions from families?
Yes. On both sides for us, right? Hey, if you guys end up deciding masks are optional, then we're not sure we want to send our kids. And then, hey, if you guys decide that masks will be required again, we're not sure we want to send our kids. And so, yeah, they're asking, you know, the comment from the one snarky dad was, and I know you probably won't tell us until after the deadline's passed anyway. So I said, look, if you don't like what we end up doing, which is going to be in the best interest of the community, call me and I will make it right with you, however you decide.
That's nice, Rob. That's so nice.
Well, the idea of having to fight with that parent for a whole year about it just sounds miserable, and I'd rather not do it. So
best money, addition by subtraction, best
Absolutely.
money you can ever spend if you just give them their deposit back.
Yep.
Okay, last question, Scooty. When are you publishing? This is from Scooty, not to Scooty. When are you publishing your revised protocols to your families before school ends, or wait until later in the summer? I think the consensus, Scooty, has been we're waiting. Most everybody's watching still. It's got to be the summer.
And
Anybody
I
doing
would
something
just
different?
I just don't think there's any way for you to have all the answers that families are going to want before you leave for the summer. So that would be my recommendation. Is, you know, I think you can. Some of the things I think you're hearing some trends from our conversation today, but there's just so much that still is in wait and see mode that I don't see how you can publish comprehensive revised protocols in the middle of May when we have no idea what the environment's going to look like in August.
Yeah, I agree.
And Scooty, so if it's any help, I'm going to go just live before my community next week and say, much like what conversation we're having here today, and say, look, here's the conversations we're having. Here's where we're trending and the direction that we're heading. There's a big old asterisk. None of this is set in stone at this point. But I do want you guys to know where we're headed, that, we are taking and reminding you that we have been and will continue to take a thoughtful and reasonable approach to keeping our entire community safe. And just remind them of that, give them a little peace of mind, but give them some insight into the direction we're headed, with the caveat that, all things subject to change.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. I think there's a middle ground between saying, trying to come out with information way too soon and too much, and saying nothing.
Agreed.
And I don't think saying nothing is an option. And I know
Agreed.
that's easy. And I know but it's not an option for you, because you've got too many people it's too polarized.
Yeah.
So I think to Rob's point, I think the idea of just coming on in a video form or live or an email and saying, hey, we are talking about this. We are listening. We're doing the research. Give us grace to get that done the right way. I like that.
We also made the decision, we are going to survey families and frame it in such a way of how they felt like this year went with the protocols, and what they not necessarily would like to see moving forward, but so that they do have input, because that is one complaint I got. It was like, you wrote this plan and you said this is what we're going to do, and they feel like they should have had input in the plan, whether or not I would have agreed with what they said. And there's probably going to be some ugly responses to that, but I think that it will help quell some of the need to share how they feel about what is going on or potentially going to happen next year.
Yeah. People have a strong need to share, don't they? Nancy, you have any parting thoughts?
Thank you, Mary Katherine, for the opportunity. I don't have any new thoughts, other than I think we have to I appreciate staying in touch with everybody. Maybe we could do this again in the summer, Mary Katherine.
Sure.
That would be helpful to everybody. I think that as things move and change over the next couple of months.
Yeah. If possible, David, if you would not mind, I would love to pray over these folks. And before we do that, I just want to say one thing, and I'm looking at Beth right now and thinking I should probably say this to all of you, since we did this with our New Heads University. David and Beth did this really amazing kind of talk with our New Heads cohort around the idea of rest and renewal. And honestly, David just was hellfire and brimstone, man. He just, this was the quote he said that I still can't get over. If our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ thought it was necessary to take time off, why aren't you? And I just think that that's so important. And so that's not my quote. That's the Reverend David Madison, but it was so good. And Beth did some really good work. And so I encourage you to, take time off. I encourage you to rest and renew and rejuvenate and take care of yourself. And because you need to, your communities need you desperately. So with that lecture over, David, would you pray us out?
Yeah, and I'll put a couple of those comments. If you look at the May newsletter, which will go out next Friday, I believe, or it may go out tomorrow, actually. No, it goes out tomorrow. If you'll look at that newsletter in my meditation, I'm pulling some snippets from the New Heads,
good.
The New Heads unit. So yeah, let's pray. Creator God, we thank you for all the blessings in this life, and we give thanks for all the communities that make up the SAES family. We ask that you be with this group of leaders, guide them with your wisdom, with your strength, take away any anxiety, any stress that they may be feeling, and restore them with your peace, the peace of God that passes all understanding. And the blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, be upon you and remain with you this day and forever. Amen.
Okay, guys, y'all have a wonderful day. It's great to see everyone's faces.
Thanks, everybody.